after decades of doing what he believed were all the right things, and he had a workplace pension worth £36,000. He had a home worth around £300,000 with just £11,000 left on the mortgage. Most people have the same question David had, to be honest, when they come to us. Now imagine thinking that you're financially ready to retire, only to find out that you're actually going to be running out of money 15 years in. Well, that's exactly what nearly happened to David. At 54, he was earning £60,000 a year as a business consultant. After decades of doing what he believed were all the right things, he came to us with a clear goal. He said, "I want to retire at 57 and live life on my own terms." But was £352,000 enough to make that dream a reality? Well, why don't you watch as we unpack David's situation, the numbers, the risks, and the retirement strategy that we used to help him avoid running out of money. Now, his vision of retirement wasn't excessive, to be fair. He wasn't dreaming of yachts or luxury cars. What he wanted was just to live comfortably on £2,700 a month net, that's after tax, which is just over £32,000 a year. And in our experience, between £2,000 and £3,000 a year tends to be the figure that most people come up with that will be enough for that type of comfortable lifestyle. Now, that would cover his essentials, that would leave room for travel and leisure, and it would allow him to enjoy his passion for golf at the local club. He planned to reduce his spending to £1,750 a month after age 75, knowing that he'd likely slow down and need less in later years. And his preference was to have more in those earlier years, and he was prepared to sacrifice life in his later years to try and do that. That's not everybody's choice, but you all need to think about whether you're prepared to do that too. Now, when David first came to us, he believed he was more or less on track. He was contributing 8% to his pension, that's 5% from his own salary and 3% from his employer, that's standard auto enrolment rules. He had 25 grand cash in his ISA, he had £260,000 spread across a few historic pensions, and he had a workplace pension worth £36,000. He had a home worth around £300,000 with just £11,000 left on the mortgage, and he reckoned he'd probably have that paid off within 2 or 3 years. He also expected to inherit £50,000 from his surviving parent in the coming years. And at 67, he was on course to receive the full state pension at £11,973 a year, and that's in today's terms. In future, we might just call that 12 grand. Now, it looked pretty solid on paper, to him anyway, but David wanted certainty. He didn't just want a guess, he wanted a clear answer to a very specific question. Can I afford to retire at 57 and draw 32 grand a year? That's when we built out his full retirement plan, factoring in inflation, investment growth, tax, and every known variable, because you don't know what you don't know. Now, we ran the numbers using a realistic 2% inflation rate, which is thereabouts the government's long-term target. I know it's a little bit higher than that at the minute. And we used a 4% assumed annual investment return based on David's middle-of-the-road attitude to investment risk, which we tend to find most people are. And that's when the truth came out. If David followed his current plan with no changes, just carried on as he was, he would run out of money by age 72. So that meant his savings would be exhausted 15 years into retirement. By age 90, the gap between what he'd need and what he'd have would be more than 160,000 in the red. Pretty scary. And to be honest, it was a brutal wake-up call, but it was also the most valuable moment in the entire process for David, because it gave him the chance to do something about it. We started by consolidating his pensions. Like a lot of people, David had collected several pots from various employers over the years, over all his careers, and tracking the fees, performance, and investment strategy across all of them was incredibly difficult, and I might argue almost impossible to do well. And the lack of clarity made planning even harder. So we brought them all together into one streamlined modern pension. Not only did this simplify things, it also reduced the overall cost, because some of his older pensions had particularly high legacy fees. We also, in this new modern pension, had loads more access to funds, and that gave him a lot better options in terms of investment strategy. Now, David could see his full picture pretty clearly at this point and manage it far more effectively. That was a great start, but from there we explored some different different strategies to get him where he needed to be. Each one addressed a piece of the puzzle, but none of them specifically were easy, quick fixes. But together, they did start to form a doable solution. We first tested what would happen if his investments achieved a slightly higher return. We used 5% instead of 4%. Now, the improvement on its own might have looked minimal, but one thing to remember, what if we could squeeze that 5% to 6% or 6% to 7%? What you must always do is try to sweat your funds as much as you can using great quality investments. Get the best result you can. But in this instance, going from 4% to 5%, all it did was help his funds last just 1 year longer. Hey, but that's a start, isn't it? And his deficit at age 90 shrank from minus 160,000 to minus 139,000 pounds. So it was something, and it was a great start, but clearly on its own it wasn't enough. So what else? Okay, well, next we looked at downsizing. David had actually already thought about selling his home and moving into something smaller because he was living alone now. The space felt excessive and it was a bit more difficult to maintain, and really all he wanted to do was play golf and not be in the house hoovering all the time. He liked the idea of moving somewhere more manageable and had set a target price of 185,000 for his next property. After paying off the mortgage, he'd free up around 115,000 pounds in equity. Now, this move made a meaningful difference with that added capital because David's funds would last until around 81. The projected shortfall at age 90 dropped to around 69,000 pounds. Much better, but still not enough on its own. Now, another option, if he decided to stay where he was, would be equity release, but it didn't sound particularly appealing to David, and as I said, he'd already pretty much decided he didn't need that bigger house. Right, so next on the table was his cash ISA, and if you recall, he had £25,000 in there. Now, when we chatted to him, he said that he probably only really needed £10,000 if something went horribly wrong. So he said, what should I do with the £15,000 I don't need? What we decided to do was take the £15,000 and pop it into his pension. That immediately gave him £3,000 tax relief, which took it up to £18,000. And because he's a higher rate taxpayer, on his tax return, he can claim back a further £3,000. So in essence, that £15,000 contribution only cost him £9,000, which was pretty good, really. I think that might be a 66% growth rate. Do your maths, and if I'm wrong, pop it in the comments. But either way, it was the right direction. Now, we also explored salary sacrifice. David agreed to sacrifice £5,000 per year of his gross salary, so he took his 60 grand down to 55 grand. He put that 5 grand into his pension from now until retirement. This added efficiency and boosted his pot at age 57, but by itself, it only pushed his funds out to age 72 again. His deficit at age 90 improved slightly to around 149k, but it wasn't a full solution on its own. In fact, none of them have been, as I think you've seen. Finally, though, we talked about phased retirement. David was pretty open to the idea of not retiring in full straight away, but he said he'd prefer not to go down that road unless it was absolutely necessary. He was already thinking about life on the golf course, but he wasn't too closed to working maybe 3 days a week and then 2 days a week over 2 or 3 years, just to put a little bit less pressure on his pension pots. But so we modelled it anyway. Even with phased retirement, the numbers only stretched to age 74, and his shortfall at 90 remained at roughly 131,000. But hopefully the picture you're getting here is all these little bits, mixing and matching them can give you a solution that might really work for you, and you've got to pick which ones you're prepared to do and which ones you aren't. So here's where it all came together for David. Each of these strategies made a particular dent, some bigger than others. But when we combined them, consolidating pensions, using part of his ISA, adding salary sacrifice, his plan to downsize, and being open to phased retirement if he needed, the picture was transformed. Now at age 57, David was projected to have a pension pot of around £410,000, and based on the assumptions used in the plan as previously stated, this was expected to support his retirement goal of £2,700 a month net until age 75, followed by £1,750 a month thereafter, without ever running out of money. And remember, That's at a 5% return, not the 4%. If we can squeeze it to 6% or 7% a year, then that will help. But remember, investments don't go in straight lines. You'll have very good years and you might have totally crap years. You've just got to look at smoothing it out over time. The projected shortfall was eliminated, and he was even expected to have a surplus by age 90. Now, whilst outcomes depend on future investment performance, of course, his new plan suggested that he would be on track at last, and David didn't need to gamble. He didn't need to delay retirement. He just needed to make a series of informed, strategic decisions. So David's case shows exactly what's possible when you stop guessing and you start thinking and you start talking to professionals and mapping it out properly. That's planning. Most people have the same question David had, to be honest, when they come to us. They say, can I retire on X pounds a year at age Y, or how much do I need if I want to retire at age Z, whatever it might be. But that question can't really be answered with a rough estimate or a rule of thumb. It just takes proper financial planning. It needs testing under real world conditions, and we need to give you a confident yes or a strong chance to adjust course before it's too late. And of course, the sooner the better with anything like this. Now, David found out just in time, and thanks to a few key decisions, some sensible conversations, he's now living the life he imagined without the stress of wondering whether his money's going to last at all. So if you're thinking about retirement and you're unsure whether your plan is workable, don't wait. Do what David did, stress test it, work on improving it, even if the results suggest you're already on track, because you might even be able to retire earlier than you thought. As with any financial plan, outcomes depend on a number of assumptions which you have to decide to make and agree with, and of course market performance, which we just don't know. We can only ever do our best. Investments can go down as well as up, and you might not get back the amount that you originally invested. That's a standard FCA warning that you should see all over your paperwork. And if you're unsure what steps to take or whether your current plan stacks up, it's always wise just to seek advice from an FCA authorised and regulated firm such as Reeves. We've helped thousands of people retire with confidence, often earlier than they thought possible, and we'd love to talk to you about what's possible. Simply click the link in the description and learn more about our free financial review. Now that you've seen a real life case study and you're thinking, hey, maybe I can retire sooner than I thought, it's crucial to consider how you'll take your retirement income. And that's when many clients think about annuities versus drawdown. And choosing the right option can make a huge difference. Get it wrong and it'll cost you thousands. Let's make sure it doesn't happen. Click here to learn more, and I'll see you all there.